Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our presentation for MGF 2351. My name is Harry, and we are Monday, 12 p.m. Group C, and our topic is Japan. As star students of Monash University, we are being drafted into Andy's researchers, a new task force of Canberra's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, also known as DFAT. Thus, the fundamental purpose of this presentation is to provide vital and critical analysis of the various key issues Australian firms may face in their introduction and expansion into Japan. Japan, or Nippon, is an archipelago-styled island nation located in East Asia and is one of the most populated and developed countries in the world as of recent times. Japanese history is heavily influenced by Chinese culture, including their language. As the years pass, however, the nation has been fractured by continuous civil war and unrest between warlord factions spread across the archipelago. This eventually led to the unification of Japan by Tokugawa Ieyasu after victory over other clans in the Battle of Sekigahara and established peace internally in the Edo period. Then after that, suddenly appeared the Kurofune Raikyu, or the arrival of the Black Ships led by Commodore Perry and the establishment of the modern Japanese state. During the Meiji Restoration in the 19th century, Japan has embarked on a sweeping westernization and modernization effort across all sectors. Its continuous modernization effort has led Japan to become one of the most powerful and economically competitive countries in the world. Today, in terms of business, perhaps there's no other large country as special as Japan in the world. If you exist right now, you have in some way or another been influenced and touched by Japanese culture and their businesses alike. Japan's culture, its businesses, and its exports are amongst the most widely sought after and popular in the world. As you watch this on your Toshiba laptop, hearing this through your Sony earphones, whilst wearing Uniqlo, sitting on your Muji couch, and going for Sunday drives in a Lexus LC500, allow us to unravel this land of the rising sun.
Presentation, first I will speak about how globalization has influenced the political economy of Japan and potential challenges faced for Australian businesses by its legal system. Next, Emma will discuss both the economic and human development of Japan and its significance for Australian firms. Thirdly, Jeanette will assess the cultural distance between Japan and Australia and whether the two nations are becoming culturally more similar or disparate. Following, Xinghai will demonstrate what industry Japan would ideally specialize in with reference to various trade theories. Afterwards, Josie will unravel the trade policies which Japan is employing and the international trade theories this use of policy correlates with. Lastly, I will analyze Japan as an overall winner or loser as a result of globalization.
Japan is a democratic, constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary government headed by a prime minister. In Japan, the royal family plays an important role in deciding which nominees would oversee the Japanese political system. To be more descriptive, according to Japan health policy now, Japan government's parliamentary system is divided into three branches: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Although Japan is a monarchy country, it has a democratic political system. Therefore, a citizen can be directly involved in policy decision-making. Japan applies civil law, which is a detailed set of law organized into codes. As mentioned in Hill and Hope, the judges in the civil law system differs from the common law system since it is less adversarial, yet less flexible. In particular, the judges do not have to interpret the tradition, precedents, and custom, while they only have the power to apply the law. These differences can create conflict in contract law between Japan and countries that apply common law systems, such as Australia. Through global trade activities and investment, these include the growth of interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and population, brought about by cross-border international trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment, people, and information. Therefore, Japan can trade its comparative advantages with other countries, especially exporting cars, electronic circuits, heavy machinery, and importing natural resources due to its small and frail geography. However, during the foreign trade, Japan must take the foreign exchange rate risk, which creates losses when Japan businesses trade directly with the foreign companies. To prevent such risk, Japan businesses should buy financial instruments, which is options and futures, to hedge and prevent the loss of risk in the future due to the fixed terms and conditions in the contract. Such risk was clearly shown in the Japan's economic bubble in the late 1980s and the early 1990s because Japan could not control the monetary policies when the number of loans increased. Besides, due to lowering the barrier of freer trade, Japan has cut tariffs and hence in 1998, Heizo and Yokichi reported that Japanese government revenue dropped about 1.1 trillion to 2.4 trillion yen, which equals to 11.72 billion and 25.57 billion Australia dollar in 2022, respectively. As we can see, although Japan can benefit from globalization, they still experience a lot of drawback during this process. Although Japan and Australia were common strategic interests, they have free and open trade. Both has democratic point of view, but the political economy is different. Australia has a mixed economy, while Japan has a free market economy, which means Japan market price is highly elastic since it depends on the supply and demand of sellers and buyers, while either intervention or regulation control the market. And now Japan's government revenue has been dropping due to the decreased tariff on Australian goods and services due to Japan-Australia bilateral relationship. As the result, Japan has been pushing the business export goods and services to Japan. They should reduce costs to produce cheaper accesses of goods and services. This has to do with a lot of research based on the demographics of target destination. Besides, language and culture differences are other challenges for Australia when they want to establish the presence in Japan. Thoroughly mention that Japan has a vertical collectivistic culture. That means people from this culture tend to view the self of being interdependent with others. They tend to emphasize human connectedness and being a participant in larger social units. They also heavily view some members of the group as having higher status than others. Therefore, serving and sacrificing for the in-group is a must. This is totally opposite to Australian culture, which is horizontal individualistic. This means that oneself treats the other individually and equally without status. Therefore, before settling a business in Japan, Australian firms should investigate in Japanese culture for future long-lasting enhancement. Thank you for listening.
I will now discuss and analyse Japan's economic and human development and the implications that this may have for Australian firms wanting to establish their business in Japan. Japan has one of the largest and most developed economies in the world. They have a large and wealthy population, high levels of education, and a hard-working labour force, which makes it one of the largest consumer markets globally. I'll discuss Japan's economic development. Economic development can be measured using gross national income per capita using the purchasing power parity. This indicator provides per capita values for gross national income expressed in current international dollars converted by the purchasing power parity. Japan's PPP has significantly increased over the past 21 years as shown in the following graph. The purchasing power parity has increased drastically from $20,130 in 1990 to $44,570 in 2021. This indicates significant economic development in Japan as it means that the population's income has risen significantly, allowing them to purchase more goods and services. In comparison to the rest of the world, Japan's PPP is well above the global average of $18,625, signifying that Japan's economy is substantially more developed than the rest of the world. This also means that overall Japan has greater living standards compared to the rest of the world. Japan's level of human development can be analysed using the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is a summary measure of average achievement in key dimensions. These dimensions include life expectancy at birth, education, and standard of living, which is measured by gross national income per capita. Life expectancy at birth is 84.8 years. Their expected years of schooling is 15.2 years, and their mean years of schooling is 13.4 years, as well as their gross national income per capita being valued at $42,274. This results in a Human Development Index of 0.925 points for 2021. This has increased by 0.002 points since 2020 and has improved significantly from 1990, where Japan's HDI was only 0.845 points. The Development Index for the world is 0.732 points, where life expectancy is 71.4 years, expected years of schooling is 12.8 years, mean years of schooling is 8.6 years, and the gross national income per capita is $16,752. Japan's Human Development Index of 0.925 exceeds that of the Global Human Development Index of 0.732. In all dimensions of the Human Development Index, so life expectancy, education, and living standards, Japan is performing significantly better than the rest of the world. Both economic development and human development are important for Australian firms to consider when they're deciding whether to establish their business in Japan. Human development is important because it entails living standards, which is measured by the gross national income per capita. This influences the ability and willingness of consumers to purchase goods and services. Education and life expectancy are also important for firms, as higher life expectancy indicates better health of the population, and education is linked to employment and income, all of which influences consumers' ability to purchase goods and services. These purchases will ultimately influence a firm's profits and thus their ability to succeed and grow in Japan. Despite this, economic development is of greater importance to Australian firms because of factors such as the purchasing power parity. The purchasing power parity for Japan is significantly higher than the rest of the world, being at $44,570 compared to $18,624 for the world. This indicates that Japan's population have a greater level of purchasing power than the rest of the world and thus a greater ability to purchase goods and services. This is of great importance to Australian firms because if purchasing power was low, it is unlikely that consumers would be able to afford as many goods and services, and thus the firm may struggle to make sales. Therefore, given that the purchasing power is high, this means that consumers should be able to afford the firm's goods and services, allowing the business to succeed and grow. Additionally, Japan's economy has significantly improved over recent years, and therefore, if it continues to do so, this will allow the firm to further develop and grow.
Question 3 will discuss the cultural distance between Japan and Australia, as well as analyzing if both of the cultures are becoming more similar or disparate. Using Hofstede cultural dimension, there are some cultural differences between Japan and Australia. In terms of power distance, Australia scored 38, which means the established hierarchy is for convenience. Managers rely on employees and teams for their expertise, and information is shared frequently. Communication between managers with employees is informal, direct, and participative, whereas Japan scores 54 in power distance, which means the Japanese are always conscious of their hierarchical positions and act accordingly. They use different languages to address people with different statuses, where formal language and honorifics are used to talk to people who have higher status. In terms of individualism, Australia scored a high 90, which categorized them as an individualist country. The society has expectations that people look after themselves, and employees are expected to be self-reliant and display initiative. In contrast, Japan scored 46, which categorized them as a collectivist country because it emphasized putting harmony of a group above individual opinion. In terms of masculinity, both Australia and Japan are considered masculine societies, where Australia scored 61 and Japan scored 95. In Australia, the behavior in the workplace is based on the shared value that people should strive to be the best they can achieve and winner take all. Japan, however, because they have a combination of mid-collectivism, we don't see an intense competitive and assertive individual behavior. Instead, they have severe competition between groups. Japanese also drive for perfection in their material production, services, and presentations, as well as being workaholics with the norms of hard and long working hours. In terms of uncertainty avoidance, Australia has a score of 51, which says that their career planning and development is quite structured and directed, as employees feel to have a clear career path. But sometimes Australians enjoy taking risks, tolerant to new things, and interested in innovations and new ideas. With a score of 92, Japan is considered one of the most uncertainty avoidant countries in the world because they're constantly threatened by natural disasters, so they learn how to prepare themselves for any uncertain situation. Japanese also put a lot of time and effort to consider all the risks and factors before all project can start, as managers usually ask for all detailed facts and figures before taking any decisions to avoid making mistakes later on. In terms of long-term orientations, Australia has a low score of 21, which indicated that they are a short-term orientation society. This means that Australia has a normative culture, and they exhibit great respect for traditions and focus on achieving a quick result. So they have a low tendency to save for the future. In contrast, Japan is considered to be one of the most long-term orientation societies with a score of 88. This is because Japanese believe in fatalism, which means that they do the best in life and that's all they can do. In the corporations, they have a high rate of investment in research and development, even in economically hard times, and they prioritize on steady growth of market share rather than half profit. The idea is companies are not here to make money every quarter for shareholders, but to serve stakeholders and society at large for many generations to come. In terms of indulgence, Australia scores 71, where they exhibit a willingness to realize their impulse and desire with regard to enjoying life and having fun. Australians also have a positive attitude and tendency toward optimism and place a high degree of importance on leisure time, whereas Japan scored 42, which means they are considered a Russian country. Japanese have a tendency to be cynical and pessimistic, and they don't put a high degree of importance on leisure time, as well as have a perception that their activities are restrained by social norms. From the Hofstede analysis, it can be said that both Japanese and Australian culture are becoming more disparate, as almost all of the dimensions are in contrast with each other, such as the differences in uncertainty avoidance and how Australia is more of a short-term orientations and indulgence country, whereas Japan is more of a long-term orientations and Russian country. In terms of Japan and Australia's power distance, their score isn't significantly different, but Hofstede describes communication between Australian managers and their employees as informal, direct, and participative, whereas communication between Japanese managers and their employees is formal. Japanese also has a high context, which means their communication isn't always direct, and sometimes they don't always say what they mean. Hofstede also mentioned that Australia is an individualist country, where in contrast, Japan is a collectivist country. They both are considered to be a masculine society, but as Japan is a combination of mid-collectivism, there's an intense competition between groups, whereas Australia has an intense competition between individuals. That will be all from me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Our discussion question 4 regarding what the industry in Japan should specialize in and what the theory from Smith or Ricardo can be applied by the government to engage in international trade. Let's focus on the theory under the absolute advantage theory suggested by Smith. When the efficiency of production in one country is higher than in any countries, the products produced by that kind of efficiency can be seen as equipped with the absolute advantage. However, in relation to absolute advantage theory, comparative advantage theory from Ricardo emphasizes buying the lower efficient producing production from other countries. So let's focus on the first question. Which industry Japan should focus on? As we all know, Japan, as an island country, has an obvious disadvantage of square of land, which makes it possible to cause a low production in agriculture. As of February 2010, 917,000 acres, or 10% of Japanese farmland, sat empty. According to Agriculture Ministry data, dormant fields are a loss of opportunity in a country where only about a third of the land is arable. It's really hard for Japan to make a high volume of agricultural food and improve its competitiveness in agricultural production in international trade. So import is without a doubt the best choice for Japan. In contrast, Japan is recognized that they have an advantage in ocean resources compared to other countries. And at least the data on PowerPoint, Japan is the largest fishing nation, and it is really beneficial for Japan to operate a more effective fishing industry or other fields of the business around the ocean, so that it can more easily maximize its economic scale of international business when trading in the world. Additionally, showing the areas of expertise when trading with other countries is another pretty choice for one country. Like the car industry, Japan is recognized as the third largest exporter of automobiles with advanced technology and mature production processes. So it can win a larger international market share with less time, money, and volume costs. In 2021, there were over 16.46 million Japanese cars that were manufactured in overseas market. So further develop car industry to increase or extend its advantage is really good for Japan. And there is no doubt that Japanese government will follow both absolute advantage theory and comparative advantage theory. However, I believe Japanese government is supposed to do more action in those industries which have a comparative advantage on the global trade. According to General Base, Japanese is a country that lacks nature resources, except for the ocean resources. Take the above content, for example. If Japan wants to maximize the land utilized in agriculture, it will use the time and money to input in a business that has an inefficient industry. And then the benefit from investment in agriculture will be less than the benefit from investing the same time and money in the car industries, since the latter has a more mature and complete product system that can reduce expansion costs. Developing agriculture without doubt has a higher opportunity cost than developing the car industry. And for a country with limited natural resources, that means it has a bigger absolute advantage in resources. Conversely, winning by technology is cheaper than winning by resources. The importance of comparative advantage lies in whether the opportunity cost developing one firm is lower than opportunity cost of developing another firm. There is no doubt that the Japanese government should pay attention to comparative advantage in this regard. Thank you.
Going to question number 5, which is the trade policy instrument that Japan currently employ. Japan was Australia's third largest trading partner in 2020, with a good two-way goods and services trade that values in 66.3 billion AUD. And Japan was also Australia's second largest export market that is valued in 46.4 billion AUD in 2020, which holds 10.6% of the total exports. Australia is exporting to Japan of natural gas, coal, iron, beer, copper, and concentrate, and aluminium. And on the other side, Japan was Australia's third largest sources of service imports, that is including motor vehicles, goods vehicles, and refined petroleum, and etc. Import quotas are the first policy instrument that we shall discuss, which limits the number of certain products that may be imported into a country, which is a mixture of quota and tariff, with a lower rate paid to imports inside than the quota than those who are over the quota. For example, for pork imports exceeding the quota rate, the tariff rate was decreased to 8%. Exports of pig to Japan, such as sausages or meat, receive a tariff rate reduction of 8% from the existing base of 10%. Moving on to tariff, which are based on harmonized system, and the majority of levies are at Valorum, which is the Percentage General Agreement on Tariff and Trade GATT. Japan maintains tariffs and restriction on agricultural products, which are important to certain Australian exporters. The Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement went into effect in 2015, and the tariffs are projected to be reduced in a variety of product areas. In addition, Abenomics is a set of economic policies that is produced from the AB administration. It consists of 3 arrows: monetary policy, fiscal policy, and structural reform. In terms of monetary policy, Japan has suffered from deflation, and the government targets achieving a 2% annual inflation rate. The inflation itself will benefit the export of different countries. In the terms of fiscal policy, the government managed to use the Keynesian approach in order to increase the rate of economic growth.
the government chose to increase the government spending, then GDP in general would increase. In terms of structural reform, the Abe administration is trying to improve the environment. Even though Japan has many advantages like good education and infrastructure, foreign investors are still barely willing to invest in Japan because of the excessive regulations. In conclusion, Japan's main policy instruments are maintaining the system of high border protection and domestic price support on agricultural products. Japanese tariffs on agricultural products are higher than those on the non-agricultural products. On average, tariff on agricultural products amounted to 15.5% in 2019, compared to 2.5% of non-agricultural products. An illustrative example is like rice, which happens to be the import of state trading what fulfills Japan's minimum access commitment under the WTO agreement on agriculture. The maximum markup which is collected by the government when importing and selling on domestic market for rice imports is set at 292 Japanese yen per kilogram. Out of quota tariff rates is 341 Japanese yen per kilogram.
Japan has overall been a winner as a result of increased foreign trade and capital flows. However, we must also consider the negative sides. First, a discussion on jobs. Globalization has allowed Japan to elevate its established comparative advantage in high value-added industries. We see the expansion of job gains in industries such as advanced ECM, chemical and precision equipment engineering, spearheading innovation and attracting buyers across the world. Shin-Etsu is the only company in the world to manufacture a 99.99% purity silicon wafer, which is used in nearly all high-quality semiconductors. Japan is a crucial contributor to the global consumer goods supply chain network. For example, every iPhone is made of roughly 10 to 18% parts from Japan. However, Japan is much like other developed nations in a way that's gradually experiencing job losses in the manufacturing sector. The downstream manufacturing industry across all fields such as apparel, footwear, and motor vehicles has experienced a slow hollowing out due to globalization. For example, Toyota offshoring the production of a classic ute, the Hilux, to Thailand. Next, let's discuss natural environment. Japan has achieved facilitation of discourse by establishing a bedrock of international standards with the Kyoto Protocol of 1997, with the primary objective of reducing global emissions of greenhouse gases. Internationalized Japanese companies such as Nissan, Toshiba, and Komatsu have been ranked amongst the most environmentally friendly companies in their sectors and facilitate a greening up domestically, as Japan is poised to become the largest user of solar PVs in the next decade. However, industrialization has increased overall drastically and has evidently resulted in severe detrimental effects upon Japan's natural environment. As of 2019, 88% of Japan's power is produced by fossil fuels, much of which was imported internationally, and is amongst the highest usages of non-renewables energies in the world. Corporate greed and government corruption has resulted in the preventable Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in the 2011 Tohoku earthquake. It is also one of the highest consumers of single-use plastics, with the average Japanese using more than 17 times the amount of landfill plastic than UK citizens. Additionally, Japan is also one of the most heavy deforesters in the world, with a renowned Japan scholar Alex Kerr considered to be an all-in-one deforestation machine. Japan's wood exports increased by 37% from 2016 to 2017 and reached over 32 billion yen to meet demands from the housing booms in China and the Philippines. Next, national sovereignty and cultural diversity. The Japanese currently enjoy the most international life in history and have embraced the products, culture, music, and art of other nations. It has allowed Japanese society to enjoy an increased freedom of choice in regards to the lifestyle and habits they choose. Stringent social issues such as gender and race discrimination have seen tremendous evolutions and improvement alongside globalization to certain extents. Yet over 70% of seniors wish for foreigners to be assimilated into Japanese cultural norms, such as compliant by traditional customs, such as submissive bowing. Some scholars have also argued that globalization has prompted an erosion and decline in traditional Japanese culture, such as Zen philosophy, natural food, and appreciation of cultural practices such as Matsuri festivals, replaced by westernized, hyper-consumerist entertainment cultures which are deemed fast food-like. Lastly, inequality and poverty. Globalization has been synonymous with general rise of standard of living in Japan. Japanese companies have been able to achieve high exports by selling in increasingly middle-class economies such as China and much of Southeast Asia. Mass imports, on the other hand, from countries such as China have allowed Japanese consumers to obtain large cost savings on everyday goods such as clothes. Japan also has lower levels of inequality than almost any other developed nation in the world, and data shows that its pay gap of an average executive to their worker is around 67 times larger, juxtaposed about 354 times in the US. On the other hand, however, average Japanese wages remain stagnated as compared to its OECD counterparts. Japan has seen little to no improvement on gender pay gap equality throughout this age, with women earning on average about only 74% of male earnings in 2021, compared to an average of only 69% of all the way back then in 1995. Average workers now work longer hours to crunch productivity, leading to a special form of death by overwork, or karoshi, in extreme cases. Fundamental inequality of migrant workers in Japan constantly exists, with exposure to poor labor standards and rights. There are two primary assumptions of Werner's product lifecycle theory. Number one, that the theory is only usable in a developed economy such as the US, and number two, that the new product will only be produced in a country where it was first invented. Both points can be proven irrelevant now because of globalization, and so the theory is largely defunct. The globalization of markets and the rural traditional ethnocentric trade philosophy has meant that today, products are launched across the world in a synchronized manner instead of beginning in the home market. For example, by 2013, General Motors has sold more vehicles in China than in America and announces launches of models at the same time. Developing economies such as China have birthed DJI, which is widely recognized internationally as the pinnacle of consumer drone products. Further, the dispersion of production in different countries has disproven the nationalist undertones of the theory even further. The first consumer smartphone was made in Shenzhen, China, by a Taiwanese company with German sensors, Japanese cameras and batteries, and Swiss gyroscopes. However, the theory remains widely used today still in services industries such as marketing and venture capital, as it helps companies plan for the release and strategy of a long-term offering. For example, the life cycle of a new smartphone with its introduction, growth, maturity, and decline, assessed in a comprehensive manner and supports managers' planning. Arigatou gozaimashita. And we hope Andy's researchers were able to teach you something about Japan and its relationship with international business.